Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you for your time, and I apologise for it being so late, but it's been a very busy day, and I wanted to be as prepared as I could, and I also wanted to see if we could publicly release retired Deputy Commissioner Rinder's report before we started this media conference, and in fact we've been able to do that, and it has now been publicly released. I just have a short statement, and then I'll take any questions you have. The Queensland Police Service notes the media release today in relation to the CMC Palm Island decision. The Queensland Police Service also received associated correspondence from the CMC today. The Police Service believes that the decision not to prosecute any of the 6 officers referred to in the CMC report of June 2010 is the correct decision. The Police Service has held a consistent view on the appropriate action to take in this matter since first providing its report to the CMC in November 2008. We are keenly conscious of the public interest in and the very strong feelings about this matter. However, decisions have to be based on evidence rather than emotion. It's worth noting that the CMC had the option of charging some of the officers criminally or with official misconduct and has chosen not to do so. Presumably, that is because there is not the evidence to support those charges. The Police Service, as I've indicated, has released now publicly the report and findings of retired Deputy Commissioner Cathy Reinders. This matter has now spanned 8 calendar years, well over 6 years in total and over 8 calendar years. It sadly started in November 2004. It's my view that it's a tragedy for all involved and it is time to bring it to a close, and I hope that today's developments will assist in doing that. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Commissioner, the Premier is far from happy. She says that she wants the current review that's underway to come up with a faster, more transparent disciplinary process. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Because this has been too long and it's left everyone with red faces.
Yeah, I don't think that the current review that the Premier announced last week of the discipline system was based solely and entirely on the Palm Island matter. The CMC have produced a report in relation to the discipline system that was released last year. As you know, we've had a CMC, previously the CJC, now in effect for 20 years, so they're very much part of that process. Our discipline system, our police discipline system is not perfect, but it's not as bad as some people say it is. It's certainly not, in my view, broken. But there's always room for improvement, and there's clearly room for improvement with the police discipline system.
You can understand the Premier's annoyance.
It's not for me to comment on the Premier's...
It's dragged on far too long. You've said that in your statement yourself. And that you
I'm sorry.
Want a more transparent and open disciplinary process and a speedy way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, do you mean the Premier is annoyed about the time this matter has taken?
Particularly this matter, yes.
I fully appreciate the Premier's view in that regard. I also think it's been far too long, and as I just said, I think it's time to bring it to a close and move on.
It's not Red Faces Day, you say?
I beg your pardon?
It's not a Red Faces Day. You're not left red-faced. I mean,
the Police Service? I don't think anyone wins out of this at all. No one. There's no winners in any of this. It's a tragedy for all concerned. And I think as well that there are some people, and perhaps understandably so, who will never believe that justice has been done and who will never be satisfied. But I don't think we can change that. And I do believe we have to bring this to a close and move forwards.
A criticism of this process is that nothing has been done except bureaucratic toing and froing between the CMC and the Queensland Police Service. Is that an acceptable way to close the case? And does that have any impact on your leadership of the case?
Well, certainly there has been toing and froing between the Police Service and the CMC over this issue. An independent, or you will form your own views as to how long people had things and whether that was a reasonable amount of time in the circumstances. I don't quite agree that nothing has happened. What has happened, and whilst there's a degree of unhappiness about that, is it would seem to me that what has happened is that the view that the Police Service expressed back in November 2008 will now proceed. And the matter will then be finalised.
What's in the report that Cathy Reinders, you've just released that now, what is in that report?
Well, it's a significant report. I would encourage people to read it and form their own views, but I would particularly encourage people to read it. If people don't have time to read the whole report, then they should at least read the first chapter of it. The determinations of retired Deputy Commissioner Reinders was that of the 6 officers named in the CMC report, where the view of the CMC expressed at that time in June 2010 was that they should, or potentially could be charged with official misconduct. Former Deputy Commissioner Reinders' view was that that was not the case, and that the appropriate course of action was that 3 of those 6 officers receive managerial guidance, and that no action, no action be taken in respect of 2 of them. I might add that one of the officers has since retired from the service on medical grounds, so managerial guidance is not an option in that regard.
What does that mean, managerial guidance?
It means just what the words say. It means that the officers involved took a course of action that wasn't appropriate, and that the way to address that is through senior management giving them guidance and advice on what they should have done rather than what they did.
Commissioner, will any of those officers be demoted at all?
No.
Commissioner, 2 coroners called the investigation bias and said that there was collusion. How can they say that there was no police misconduct? I'm not particularly aware of the detail of what both coroners said, but certainly both coroners were critical. That's been considered as well. That's been considered by the CMC. And the CMC, and I think they made the right decision here, have decided that in relation to some of those specific criticisms by both coroners, and particularly by Coroner Hine in the second inquest, that there is insufficient evidence to prosecute the officers.
Commissioner, is the police service dodging responsibility here by releasing Happy's report at this late stage in the day? I'm just looking it up on my phone now. It's 400 pages long. We're not going to get an opportunity to question you about it. What do you have to say to that?
I've got several things to say in response to that. It's a very fair question. I'll give you a very fair answer. Firstly, Cathy Reinders' report was delivered to the CMC on the 23rd of December last year. Soon after that, the CMC issued me with a direction that I was not to discuss the content or findings with anyone at all, and nor was I to release the report. That was a lawful direction in the view of the CMC given to me. So that's why the report could not be released. Today, the CMC have rescinded that direction, and today I'm able to release the report, and today we are releasing the report.
How would you describe the CMC's reaction to this report today and the emotive comments that it's made?
It's really important that we have a CMC in Queensland. That's a well-established entity now in the Queensland landscape, and I totally support the existence of a body such as a or the CMC. And it's important that the CMC and the Police Department, for that matter other agencies, work in a professional way with the CMC. Having said that, there will be points of difference from time to time. That's unavoidable, and in a democracy that's probably healthy. There's probably been no greater area of angst and emotion than this matter. And it's been there for a long time, and as I said, it's time to move on. I don't want to today sit here and be critical of the CMC. I want my comments to be objective and balanced and reasonable. The only thing I would say, though, in respect of that, is that I do think that it's a little bit unreasonable to say that, and if you can just bear with me while I just refer to the particular passage, that it's astounding that we've found that there's not a necessity or it's not appropriate to charge the officers with misconduct. We had that view when we completed our report and gave it to the CMC in November 2008. And our view has not shifted substantially at all since that time. Before we gave the CMC our report in November 2008, we gave it to a very experienced senior counsel who we understand agreed with the views in that report. So our position on this has been steady for some considerable time.
Isn't that almost sort of the crux of the brouhaha between the CMC and the police force? It's that there are those two
Yes, and you're quite right in my view. I share that view. And regrettably, with these things, there have been decisions of the High Court of Australia, the full component of the High Court of Australia with 7 judges, where it's been a 4-3 split, where 4 judges have said one thing and 3 have said the other, and of course it goes on a majority view. This matter, I think, in the recent history in Queensland has probably demonstrated the greatest mix of views that you could possibly imagine. I mean, you might well recall that way back with this in relation to Hurley, the Director of Public Prosecutions said that there would be no prosecution action against Chris Hurley because it was a terrible accident. And you might recall also that the CMC at the time agreed with that decision not to prosecute Hurley. Now that went to Sir Lawrence Street for a second opinion, and his view was that Hurley should be prosecuted, and he was. So as you go back through the history of this, you will find that there has just been a mix of views by people who are well qualified and well credentialed. And it's a fact, I think, that people can look at a set of facts and come to different opinions on that set of facts.
What value is there in having the CMC to oversee the police if the police are able to exonerate themselves?
The CMC is an essential part of the Queensland landscape. This is only one case. I think it's relevant, sir, to your question that the CMC have decided, the CMC, in my view, have the power to charge these officers excuse me, with official misconduct. They have chosen not to do that. That's their decision. So it's with respect to your question, and I say this absolutely respectfully, I don't think it's appropriate to imply that the CMC are a toothless tiger and do nothing. They can take action if they so chose. They have chosen not to take that action.
What about this legal loophole, though, that prevents people?
There is no legal loophole in my view. None whatsoever. The CMC could have, as they said back in June last year, charged the 6 officers with official misconduct. They have chosen not to do that. There is no legal loophole. I'm not a lawyer, but there is no legal loophole in my view that prevents them taking that course of action. There is the disciplinary process, like any legal process, is not a simple process. It's a complex process. What they're talking about, as I understand it, is the fact that if the police department had chosen to charge the officers with misconduct, that the CMC could have appealed the ultimate determination of that misconduct hearing. We have never said that we believe the officers should be charged with misconduct. We have consistently held the view that the appropriate course of action in this matter was managerial guidance.
The Mayor of Palm Island has called for you to stand down over this matter. What's your response?
Well, I don't believe that it's appropriate or necessary that I should stand down. I understand the angst that people have. That's not the first time that that claim has been made. What I want to do is for the police department to work with the people of Palm Island, and we already do that. We have a Police Citizens Youth Club on Palm Island. We have police on Palm Island who I believe work well with the local community. And we want to obviously maintain that relationship and hopefully put this behind us and move on.
So are you confident that relations between the police and Aboriginal people on Palm Island and in other Indigenous communities can recover from this really dark day in Queensland's history?
Look, I hope so. I think on Palm it will be more difficult than other places. Certainly, sometimes we dwell too much on the negatives. There are some really good things happening between police and Indigenous people. Can I give you but one example, and that's the Police Citizens Youth Club model. We currently have Police Citizens Youth Clubs on Palm Island, at Yarrabah and Mornington Island. We're about to open one at Doomadgee. We're also about to open one at Cooktown, and even though that's not an Indigenous community, the intention is to bus children in from Hopevale and Wudjil to Cooktown on a very regular basis. The PCYCs are doing a great job and working well with the local communities.
What message do you have for Mr. Doomadgee's family?
Look, as I said, this has been a tragedy for everyone. I just hope that today is the starting point where we can draw the line in the sand with this and move forwards.
The CMC is seeking legislative changes, and a part of that review into discipline that's also going to take place. Obviously, they would probably, it would appear as if they would seek sort of strengthen What's your response to that?
Yeah, several points if I could. Last year the CMC released a report on the discipline system. In that report there are 13 recommendations. One, a recommendation for talks about a similar issue and makes a similar recommendation. I need to probably more clearly understand what it is the CMC are seeking in terms of the legislative change. But ultimately, whilst I would hope the police department would be consulted by the government in respect of any legislative change is a matter for the government.
Martin Moynihan has been quoted.
Oh, can I just, add something to that? Last week, the Premier announced one of those recommendations in the CMC report on discipline, recommendation 3, talked about the need to develop and do further work on the police discipline system to do those sorts of things that are address those sorts of things that are common criticism, that it takes too long, that too many people are unhappy with the result, and those sorts of criticisms. Last week, the Premier announced a working party that would do just that, would look at those issues and address recommendation 3 in the CMC report. And the working party that are doing that, as announced by the Premier last week, are Simone Webb, retired Supreme Court Justice Glenn Williams, and retired Assistant Commissioner Felix Grayson. And that working party is being overviewed by a steering committee consisting of Ken Smith, the Director General of the Premier's Department, Mr Moynihan and myself. So there is already something happening in that space.
There's an independent review so that officers can be held accountable for their actions. So in terms of, I guess that would take away the latest investigation from Cathy Rinder's report, that then they would be responsible for that and it would be taken out of police hands.
Yeah, look, I would say that police are already accountable for their actions. We are subject probably now without question to the greatest degree of scrutiny than we ever have in our history as an organisation. And this is not one-sided. There are a number of police who have been sacked by the Deputy Commissioners for misconduct and who have been reinstated on appeal by superior courts. So it would be wrong for people to think that this is a one-sided argument here and that all that ever happens is that police are not dealt with appropriately. We get criticised as well from some quarters, particularly the police union. When I say we, I mean the senior administration of the service, the executive, for being too harsh and unreasonable. We are criticised frequently for that. On the other hand, we are criticised by some as well for being too lenient. And as I said, I can give you a number of examples, at least half a dozen, where we have sacked people and they've been reinstated into the service by appeal courts.
How would you view this particular review, lenient or harsh?
This particular
review by Cathy Rinder's, which I haven't managed to see.
Well, I think, can I suggest that people read it and make up their own minds? But I think it's a thorough, competent and professional document.
Commissioner, do you think the outcome in this case would have been different if Mr Doomadgee was a white man?
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think part of the tragedy of this was that, and I've expressed this view before, and everyone has expressed views and opinions on this, but I think one of the real tragedies of this was I genuinely believe that everyone, and when I say everyone, I think everyone involved in this, and it goes beyond the police department, sadly thought that this was another death in custody of a person who had died of natural causes. And in fact, at the very time that this happened on Palm Island back in November 2004, there was another death of an Indigenous man in far northwest Queensland who in fact died of natural causes, almost at the identical time. And what we learnt from this, sorry, I'm just struggling with the flu at the moment, so if you just bear with me while I have a drink of water. What we learnt from this was that you can never, ever, ever go into any death investigation and assume anything. Since this happened, we have investigated over 50 deaths in custody. They are done very differently now to how they were done on this occasion. To my knowledge, whilst there may have been criticism of the actions of the police in some deaths in custody, there has been no criticism whatsoever from any quarter, particularly the coroner, who is the most important person in this situation, of the quality and the competency of those investigations. So yes, we should have investigated this differently and better. We have learnt from that,
and we have not repeated the mistakes that were made on that occasion.
Commissioner, who specifically gave you legal advice that CMC could actually charge this question?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Who gave you the legal advice that said the CMC could charge those officers?
Yeah, I haven't sought legal advice on that point. You'll recall that in June last year, the CMC released this report. Okay, can I refer you to a passage of that report?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
In essence, I thought you were saying you believe the CMC can charge these officers. The CMC today said
Yes.
they cannot.
Yeah, that was at the point where I was asked earlier a particular question, and it refers to this comment in the CMC media release. This means that after 6 years and 2 coronial inquiries, the case is now closed and the CMC has been prevented from taking the matter any further. Now, as I said, I'm not a lawyer, but back in June, the CMC said this. This is at page 175 of the report. However, if the CMC is not satisfied, that is, if the CMC is of the view that the intended action will not achieve the purpose of discipline, the CMC will assume responsibility for the matter and make application to QCAT to commence disciplinary proceedings. Now, the CMC have chosen not to do that. I think that is the right decision. I support that decision. But what I'm saying to you, it just seems to me that that decision was still open to them and they have chosen not to take that course of action.
They're saying it's based on law that they cannot do that.
Yeah.
They may have intimated earlier that they thought they could.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you saying that they can is not based on any law, it's just your belief.
You with the greatest of respect, sir, you would need to go back to the CMC and ask what the law is that prevents them from doing it, because I'm not aware of what that is. I believe it's the right decision. I'm pleased that they've come to that determination. I don't want to see that happen. But what I'm saying to you is that and I accept the right of the CMC to hold their view, that it's not quite right to say that the CMC has been prevented in some way by the disingenuous behaviour of the Queensland Police Service from taking any action in this matter.
So their whole call for legislative change, you believe, is a waste of time?
Well, I'm not in a position to comment on that. Firstly, I don't, to any great degree. Firstly, I don't know precisely what it is that they're seeking in terms of the legislative change. And secondly, legislative change is not a matter for your police commissioner, it's a matter for the Queensland Government.
So, Commissioner, you wouldn't say this is an example of culture of police cover-ups?
No, well, not only would I say it's not, but I would say that there has been no matter in the history of Queensland, probably in the last quarter of a century, post-Fitzgerald, that's been the subject of greater scrutiny. And what it demonstrates, I think, is that people, good people, decent people, reasonable people can look at something and come to very different views based on the same material.
What do you say in regards to that you've known since the 23rd of December what the decision was that's been made? Why now, so many months afterwards, are we only worried about it?
That's something you'd have to ask the CMC.
Why could not the police release that? So it's an undertaking of the CMC. Why couldn't the police say, why can't we release that?
Yep, okay. The reason for that is this, and I'm happy to, if the CMC are agreeable, to give you a copy of the letter, is that we gave it to them, or retired Deputy Commissioner Cathy Reinders gave it to them. As you're aware, I was excluded from this process by an order of the Supreme Court. So she gave it to them on the 23rd of December. It seemed to me that that's the decision-making process. You know, I was excluded from, as you recall, from being part of that. I think it was reasonable that the CMC had some time to digest that. In January, and I can't recall a precise date, the CMC gave me a direction in writing that I was not to discuss the matter with anyone. The direction included the fact that they had taken it over, and the term that is used for that is that they had assumed responsibility. So they've taken it over, and they've issued me with a direction that I can't discuss it with anyone
or release the report. Now, that's my memory, but if that's not precisely accurate, that's the substance of what was in the letter. If the CMC are agreeable, I have no objection, if you wish, to releasing that letter to you. And if we could just touch base with you after this media conference, and we'll undertake to follow up on that.
Commissioner, objectively, have relations between police and CMC improved or declined since Mr. Moynihan took over?
I'm sorry, forgive me again. It was just a bit hard to hear you. Could you repeat that question?
Since Mr. Moynihan took over, have the relationship between the police and CMC improved or deteriorated?
Look, I think that it's not appropriate to comment on the relationship between the police and the chair of the CMC at any point in time. What we need to have is a professional working relationship that the people of Queensland can have confidence in, and that the people of Queensland can have confidence in both agencies. We're both taxpayer-funded agencies, and the people of Queensland are entitled to have confidence in both bodies. And when you look at the CMC legislation, the legislation that brings that organisation into existence and provides for its governance, it talks about the principles and it talks about the two agencies working in cooperation. It talks about community confidence. It talks about the CMC assisting the police department in terms of capacity building. So there are a whole range of things here that govern the Act. What we need as agencies is to work together in the spirit of that legislation.
Commissioner, you've quoted from the CMC's report there,
yes,
saying that the CMC does have the power to do that thing which it says it doesn't have the power. Do you believe it is proper that the CMC should have that power?
Oh, absolutely. The CMC have long had the power to take over an investigation into police behaviour and have long had the power to institute proceedings for official misconduct. I have no difficulty with the current framework for that at all.
So if it's revealed that they don't actually have that power, if after a great lawyer's discussion it's revealed they don't have that power, you would be in favour of them being given that power?
I don't. Well, they've already got it. They've got the power to institute proceedings for official misconduct.
Well, but you said you're not a lawyer.
No. What the CMC, as I understand it, have said is that they can't institute proceedings for official misconduct for some legal reason or because of some legal loophole. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding of what the CMC has said.
Okay, and what I'm saying with the greatest respect is I think if you wish to pursue that line, there's no point asking me. You need to go back to the CMC and say, tell us exactly what the legal loophole is and what the basis for that assertion is. And then again, with respect, you need to take that to a lawyer yourself and maybe get an opinion on that. Because I'm not aware of it. I can't understand it.
From an outside
and can I say, I think it's the right decision not to do that. And I don't want to see that happen. And I'm pleased that it isn't happening. But the point, I think, is a relevant one, but it's not one for me to decide. It's one for you to engage with the CMC about.
But you believe the CMC should have that power to institute?
They've got it now, and I have no difficulty in them retaining it.
Do you think from an outsider's point of view it would be fair to look at what's happened over the last 7 years, particularly today, with the reasons the CMC gave for not pursuing the matter any further, the CMC may have caved into the Queensland Police Force?
No, I don't think you could ever accuse the CMC of doing that. It could well be that this sad matter could be looked at into the future in terms of improving the process to ensure, hopefully, that we never have this sort of time frame again. But it's also probably worth recognising that it is, a judicial process, and those things can take time. In this case, obviously, far too long. But that's what's happened. So all we can do is learn from. None of us, as much as we would like to, we can't wind the clock back. If I could wind the clock back to November 2004, the police department would not have gone anywhere near Palm Island. I would have said to the CMC, you do this, you go to Palm Island, you investigate this. But that statement is predicated with the wisdom of hindsight, and wouldn't that be a wonderful thing if we all that? And I'm not being critical of anyone saying that, but I'm just saying if I had the time over again, we would never, ever have done this. We would have got the CMC to do it. Can I just go back to your other question too? It's important to note that that direction that was given to me not to discuss Kathy Rinder's findings or the report or release it was rescinded today by the CMC. So as at today, I'm able to release it, and that's what we've done.
Just going back on your statement there, saying that you never would have had the Queensland Police Police Service involved in that initial investigation, that's actually an admission that the investigation was flawed to begin with by the Queensland Police Service.
No, not at all. Not at all. Can I restate that I think that what happened with that, and I think it's tragic, that there's a tragedy of itself in that belief that I think was held by people that this is a death in custody, and the most likely thing, of course, is it was a natural cause as a young man who died far too early, you know, and everyone is aware of the dreadful disadvantage suffered by Indigenous people. I think the reality is that an Indigenous man is likely to die 20 years earlier than a white person in Australia, and we all accept, I think that's terrible. But had we known the circumstances of Mulrunji's death, what I'm saying is, had we known, of course no one knew at the time, then I would have asked the CMC to take it over right from the start and do the whole thing.
If in the unlikely, hopefully unlikely circumstance of a death in custody of an Indigenous male while in a police watch house, would you call in the CMC?
Well, as I mentioned, since this, we've investigated over 50 deaths in custody. Sadly, some of those have involved Indigenous men who were in custody. And the definition of being in custody is a very broad definition. It includes being involved in a police pursuit. If the police are chasing someone in a car and that person is killed, that's a death in custody. So it's a very broad definition. And those investigations, they're done now by our Ethical Standards Command. The CMC and the coroner, of course, the coroner directs the investigation. At all points of this, everything is done exhaustively, thoroughly, and as I said, in those 50 investigations since, to my knowledge, there has not been a criticism of the quality or the professionalism or the competency of the investigation that's been conducted.
If it did ever happen on Palm Island again?
I'm sorry?
If it did ever happen on Palm Island again, it would be the CMC police.
Yeah, we're probably starting to get now into hypotheticals that are getting a bit close to the margin, but in the event that there were a further death of an Indigenous person in custody on Palm Island, that obviously would be a nightmare for everyone involved. But I think in that case we would be asking the CMC to do it, not the Ethical Standards Command, given the obvious sensitivities, and let's hope that never happens, and we're very conscious and cautious of avoiding it ever happening again. But the decision in respect to that is not mine. It's made by the coroner, and currently there is discussion and debate about the next step, I guess, if you like, in this stage and process of investigating deaths in custody. And one of the things that's under consideration is the concept of having a small group, about 4, say, of very senior, experienced investigators actually attached to the coroner's office, and that they would do the initial investigations of deaths in custody, or most deaths in custody. That hasn't been finalised yet. It's the subject of current discussion between the coroner, the CMC and the police department, but it's a decision obviously that would need to be ticked off by the government before it occurred.
And would that sort of group be drawn from the police ranks?
Yes.
But would they give up their, involvement or the police and having...
Look, my sense of it is that they'd still be police officers, but if it were to evolve that way, that occurred, the coroner's investigative group, that they would be working out of the coroner's office. They'd still have all the powers of police officers, but they'd be working out of the coroner's office.
So they would be independent of the police?
Yes, in that sense, but I believe that the officers at Ethical Standards Command, who have been investigating these deaths now for some years, have demonstrated a sense of independence. See, when the police investigate a death, they don't do that for me. They don't investigate that death under my direction. They investigate that death under the direction of the coroner. If there is a death in custody, the coroner controls the investigation. So that's a really important thing to recognise. So they don't do it for the Commissioner, they do the investigation for the coroner, and they report regularly and frequently to the coroner on the progress of the investigation, and the coroner can direct them to do this or to do that or to do something else. And that has been in place in Queensland now that legislation that empowered the coroner with those powers was in place before Mulrunji's death.
Are you aware of any occasions where the CMC prosecuted an officer who only received managerial guidance?
I'm sorry, but that question really, from time to time, the CMC will appeal a decision, a discipline decision made by a senior officer of the Queensland Police Service, and sometimes, and it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes they will if they're unhappy, and they have the right to do that. And sometimes those appeals are successful, and sometimes they're not. But that, to me, is all part of the system we have.
So they have actually prosecuted someone that the police said only deserved managerial guidance?
No, that's not what I said. If the police decide, and that's, I think, as I understand it, part of the CMC's angst over this matter, their point, as I understand it, and it's not for me to speak for the CMC, is that because we have decided that the appropriate course of action is managerial guidance, that doesn't give the CMC the right to appeal that decision. Now, that may or may not be the case. I don't want to get too far into this, but it was never our view that the officers should be charged with misconduct. If we charged the officers with misconduct, hypothetically, then if the CMC were dissatisfied with the outcome of that, the decision in that regard, they could appeal it. But we have never been of the view that that should happen.
Could you define managerial guidance? Is it a slap on the wrist?
It is precisely what it says it is. In the hierarchy of things that can happen in an investigation, there are 5. If someone makes a complaint against a police officer, there are 5 things that can happen. The first and most serious is that the officer is charged criminally with an offence. The second is that the officer is charged with official misconduct. The third is that the officer is charged with misconduct. The fourth is the officer is given managerial guidance, which is educative corrective guidance, which basically says this is what you did and this is what you should have done. And it's about an educative, learning approach. And might I say that there are many entities and jurisdictions worldwide that see that as the best way in terms of dealing with discipline, that educative, learning approach. And then the fifth one is that no action at all is taken. In this case, since 2008, the view of the police service has been that these particular matters warranted dealing with through managerial guidance.
In this instance, is managerial guidance a one-off session? Is it ongoing over a number of years? How does that work?
No. The managerial guidance in this case, if that goes ahead, and it would seem as though it will now, will be provided by a very senior officer, at least at the rank of Assistant Commissioner, perhaps a Deputy Commissioner, and part of it will be, obviously, to convey to the officers the significance of what they should have done with the wisdom of hindsight compared to what they did.
So it could be a day session?
Yes. Anything else?
Commissioner, just one last question. Would you say this case has cost the Queensland Police Service and taxpayers millions of dollars?
Without doubt, the cost of this is, I would think...
What it's cost?
No, I don't. You'd have to look at every aspect of it. No, it's been a very sad and tragic affair, and I just hope that today is a turning point in the sense that we can start to say, well, as sad and tragic as it's been, at this point in time, on this day, we started to close off on it, draw that line in the sand and move on. And can I just say as well that these are complex issues. We've released the Reinders report. I'm available at any time in the future if there are follow-up questions. Okay. Thank you for your time today.